Couple minutes. Just get the right paper here. I hereby call this regular meeting of the City of Bloomington City Council to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and do the roll call of attendance, please.
Alderman Purcell.
Here.
Alderman Fazzini.
Here.
Alderman Fruin.
Here.
Alderman Sage. Alderman Moalamwe.
Here.
Alderman Stearns.
Here.
Alderman McDade. Here. Alderman Schmidt. Here. Mayor Stockton.
Here. Okay, on the agenda, the recognition and appointments, the 3 reappointments should actually be under the consent agenda. It didn't make it under that, so I would ask somebody to make a motion to incorporate that under the consent agenda. Stephen.
I make a motion that we include the recognition and appointments under the consent agenda.
5A?
5A.
Okay.
Need a second.
I will second that motion.
Okay, we'll do a voice vote on that. All in favor, unless there's some discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll make that item 6Q. And that takes care of item number 5. We'll now move to the consent agenda, item 6A through the new item 6Q. Okay. The items on the consent agenda are placed there by the city manager and occasionally by the council, with the expectation that the items are not controversial enough to require separate discussion or a separate vote. Should there be any disagreement by any member of the council, any single member of the council even, any one member can have that item removed and placed on the regular agenda for discussion and a separate vote. So with that, I would ask, are there any council members that would like to remove an item from the consent agenda and move it to the regular agenda? Okay, I see none. Therefore, it would be appropriate to have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I make a motion, we approve the consent agenda as presented, along with the item 6Q. Make sure it's there.
Okay, 6A through
Yep.
6Q. Thank you,
Right.
Stephen.
Second that motion.
Okay, is there, well, we don't do discussion on that, so items 6A through 6Q, the motion is to approve. A yes vote will go along with that. So let's go ahead and have a roll call vote on 6A through 6Q.
Alderman Purcell.
Yes.
Alderman Fazzini.
Yes.
Alderman Fruin.
For both the consent and regular agenda, do not have any personal or business interest in any of the listed items, nor have I received any financial benefits from any of the parties or organizations referenced in these specific agenda items, and I vote yes.
Alderman Milamwe.
Yes.
Alderman Stearns.
Aye.
Alderman McDade. Yes. Alderman Schmidt. Yes.
Okay, the consent agenda motion has passed and is approved. Moving to item number 7, the regular agenda. The first item on the regular agenda today is a presentation by Sikich, our auditors, and a recommendation that what we're about to hear and what has been presented to us be received.
Right.
So,
Mayor and Council, if I could just make a few brief comments before we introduce our distinguished guest tonight. Previously, in the end of December, you received a number of very thick and lengthy documents. The City of Bloomington's comprehensive annual financial report, which takes into account the general fund, the enterprise funds, all the various accounts of the city, a separate financial report for the Coliseum, and some other miscellaneous reports. I think if there's anything I'd like to kind of say tonight is that these financial statements for the fiscal year ending April 30th, 2012, demonstrate that the city continues its upward progress in improving, strengthening its overall financial health. Not only have we seen the unreserved fund balance and the general fund rebound to some almost near historic highs, we are continuing to make strong progress as we address other financial issues in some of the other funds themselves. This particular, all these financial reports wouldn't have been possible without the efforts of Paulette Hurd, our chief accountant. If you would just stand for a minute, Paulette. Yeah, some of you, she's been with us less than a year, I think, or maybe right around there. And not just Paulette, but Paulette really had the responsibility to bring together all the financial statements, everything needed for the outside auditors to review and to test our overall financial statements per se. Paulette has been assisted by many members of the Department of Finance. All departments have played a role in helping to provide information, be available for audits and things of that nature. And Paulette has also been assisted by Patty Lynn Silva, our new finance director, who came to us in May of last year, just as, you know, really we should have been wrapping up or getting things ready for the audit. So a lot of, you know, I just want to compliment a very strong team of very competent individuals who have pulled together these particular financial records for review by Sikich, which is our outside auditing firm. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce and ask to come forward Chad Lucas. Chad is a partner with Sikich, and they are in a multi-year audit of the city's financial records. And Chad, if you don't mind, I'll just ask Kelly Bruns to stand up, please. Kelly is the audit manager. She's the one who's here for weeks on end, and we just want to recognize her efforts as well. So at this point in time, I'll turn to Mr. Lucas for kind of an overview of their audit of the city's financial statements for fiscal year 2012.
Thank you, David. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you again this year. I want to second David's comments regarding the finance staff. We appreciate all their efforts. Paulette was great. This is her first year through the audit cycle, and very helpful as she was kind of getting her feet wet on learning the city's processes as well. So we really appreciate all their help. We realize that they have a job to do, a day-to-day job to do, in addition to answering our audit questions on top of that. So we appreciate their efforts. I think that you've had an opportunity, as he mentioned, you've had the reports for a while, so I'll just be brief in my comments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. The first thing that I wanted to mention was the Coliseum audit report, the separately issued Coliseum audit report. And what I wanted to remind you of is that the Coliseum audit report is kind of made up of two pieces. One piece is the operating fund that the management company keeps track of, and then there's also a separate piece that is on the city side of things, and we combine those items together for this separately issued audit report. Included in here are the combination of those two sub-funds, if you will. We issued an unqualified opinion. It was a clean audit opinion for the financial statements for the Coliseum. Just a couple of things that I wanted to point out. On page 3 is the statement of net assets. It includes a list of all your assets, liabilities, and your net assets. Your net assets include things that are invested in capital assets, net of any related debt, and then there's unrestricted. On page 4, you can see the near the bottom there's a change in net assets. And the change in net assets is actually a decline of about $873,000. But I wanted to point out that if you look up in the expense section, there's depreciation of approximately $911,000 that essentially creates that loss. With that, if there's any questions specifically about the Coliseum, I'd be happy to answer those. We did also issue a management letter associated with that, and I just had a couple of comments, so be happy to answer any questions with respect to the Coliseum report.
Rob? Maybe not a question, but just a comment. We have about $2 million a year in bond debt, if I'm not mistaken, City Manager?
Debt service.
Debt service?
Yep.
And that is for an asset that the city has that we call the Coliseum.
Sure.
We have also used the Convention and Visitors Bureau using state guidelines to determine how much money comes into the city solely because the Coliseum is here. And the figures that I believe we've gotten from them is it's between 3 and 4 times that $2 million. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up is that money does not go on the city's books. That goes on the income statements of hotels, restaurants, gas stations, shopping malls. So we're actually providing much more money for people in our town, in our community, than we, the city, are paying. But we're not getting credit for all of that on the books. So just to help clarify, the books are right. I love the fact that we have an audit and we have a clean opinion, but it is a little misleading if you don't look at the total picture. Does that sound accurate?
Sure.
Thank you.
Although you haven't audited the those particular numbers.
No. There in the city's CAFR, in the financial report, in the back there's a statistical section, and there's information about tax revenues and various things, trend information. That I would mention too is also unaudited. We don't audit all of the information that we collect and receive from the various agencies that provide the information.
Mayor, if I could, just in reference to that, I just want to repeat what came out in the 5-year anniversary report. by the Coliseum and by SIAM, and that is in the first 5 years, using that formula, they calculated the local economic impact of the Coliseum was over $70 million, and that's just in the first 5 years. So that's that number when you look at since opening just for the first 5 years, over $70 million local economic impact.
Judy?
Well, you can look at the impact of any city asset, whether it be streets, whether it be BCPA, Coliseum, any city asset has obviously financial ramifications. And I'm just curious, would the bond ratings ever consider, some theoretical economic impact of a city asset, in your opinion?
I'm not sure if it would or not.
Okay. Next?
The comprehensive annual financial report, the very large item that you have, I just wanted to make a comment that really the only thing in here that's ours is the audit opinion. It's an unqualified opinion, which means it's a clean opinion. The information that's in the management discussion and analysis is probably the best place to get condensed financial information about what's in the rest of the CAFR, along with explanations of increases, decreases, things of that nature. That is actually written by management, and so that's really kind of the best place to get the most information is to read the about 15 or 20 pages of management discussion and analysis.
Let me interrupt you there for just a minute. David, the CAFR came out at the end of the year. Is that on I haven't checked, is that on the website?
It is.
Okay, great. So should anyone want to go through the hundreds of pages, of which some are actually fairly interesting, some aren't, but it is out there and you can peruse that from your home.
A couple of things that I just wanted to point out. Starting on page 38 are the basic financial statements. These include both the governmental and the business type activities. The business type activities being your enterprise funds, your water, sewer, Coliseum, those types of funds, parking, and the governmental activities is the rest of your activities. At the bottom of the page, I'll just kind of point out that on page 38, that again, your net assets, you have in your total column, you have about $285 million of assets, capital assets, net of any related debt. And that's the vast majority of your total net assets. You can see that your unrestricted net assets are about $1.1 million. And that includes all of your capital assets and all of your debt, including any other long-term liabilities, compensated absences, things of that nature. On page 40 is your statement of activities, and in the governmental activities, I just wanted to point out that you had a reduction and a decrease of about $6.5 million in the governmental activities. The primary reason for that is because you issued bonds to pay off your early retirement obligation, and so there was no asset associated with that liability, and so there was a reduction in your total net assets of about $6.5 million, and I think the issue was close to $7 million. So, on page 43 is your fund financial statements for your income statement, statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. You can see that the general fund had a reduction this year of about $766,000, but in total, your total governmental activities funds were an increase of about $4.4 million. And then we have some information about on page 45 about the proprietary funds, all your water, sewer, Coliseum, stormwater management. And then after the financial statements are the footnotes that give more detailed information. And then after that, starting on page 115, I believe, are required supplementary information. And this gives some information about your pension funding for IMRF, police and fire pension. So there's some good information there. Does anybody have any questions about the CAFR?
Mayor, if I could,
Go ahead, and then we'll take your question.
Chad, going back, you mentioned on page 45, anyone who looked at these, look under stormwater management would see a deficit in net assets, about 11 million. Can you just remind the council and the audience why that is and how that's kind of skewed for legitimate reasons?
Sure. The Stormwater Management Fund has Illinois EPA loans that the sanitary district actually, the loan is through the sanitary district. It's for an asset that is actually on the sanitary district's financial statements, but the city has an agreement that has assumed a portion of that liability. And so the liability is on your financial statements, but the asset is not, which causes the deficit fund balance.
Plus that, the need for that is required by federal law, the need for the fund. Judy?
Are we including OPEB, other post-employment benefits now, in our pension liability?
Your pension liability is separate from your OPEB liability, but they're both included in here.
And that's relatively new, isn't it?
Yes. GASB 45 required the OPEB liability to be, I think that was 3 or 4 years ago? 2008, yes.
Okay. And I just wondered if I heard you correctly that the general fund has gone up 4.4 million. Is that correct?
Actually, for the current year, it's actually down a little bit, 700,000 or so. But in total, the governmental funds in total are up about 4.2 million, I think.
So other than the enterprise funds?
Correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Anything else on that?
Mayor, if I could, just one other thing that I think might pique the council's interest. Could you just refer to what page where you have just some of that comparative data? I can't remember if our staff put it together showing on pensions where we are on a funded basis versus the benchmark.
Sure.
Just to draw the council's attention to that and show them, especially, the transition in the IMRF, from that funded ratio from the past, the current.
Sure.
What page is that?
The IMRF required supplementary information is on page 116, and it's got a 6-year trend information. And essentially, what happens with IMRF is when someone elects retirement, IMRF actually pulls the liability out of the calculation that you receive on what your liability is, and they also pull the assets out of your fund at IMRF, and they segregate it. And so you can see in 2008, from 2007 to 2008, your liability actually declined and your assets declined, and then that continued again into 2009 because your early retirement election period was from May 1st, 08 through April 30th, 09. So in that year time, which covered 2 calendar years, there was a reduction in both the liability and the assets at IMRF. As you can see, that's continued to increase now over the past 2 years. It's going back up again. But for the calendar year ending 12/31/11, you were only about 32% funded at IMRF, and that was prior to the early retirement. You were 86% funded. So that's the reason for the significant decline. We do include in the audit communication packet, the other document that you have in the back, we include some benchmark information of comparisons between the two, between all 3 of your pension funds, and then a benchmark of other local governments your size in the state of Illinois.
You said the reason for the significant decline from 86 to 32% in the IMRF was because of the early retirement fund?
Well,
aren't there other reasons?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the market value of the funds declined in 2008. That was another reason as well. What I meant to say was that prior to that date, you were 86% funded. Now you're about 32% funded, but some of that is the result of they're pulling out both the liability and the related assets and segregating it. But yes, the market did impact.
I just want to clarify
yeah.
that.
Thank you.
That wasn't the whole thing. And David, we elected, what, a 6-year payoff on the early retirement fund?
Yes, and the council previously, authorized kind of refinancing those future payments, and we did that, reducing the interest rate that was being paid close to, 6 or 7%?
I think it was 7.5% at IMRF.
And about 1%. So there was some significant savings. That's all paid off now, and then we're just carrying that debt for, I can't recall how many more years on.
That was going to be my next question. It can't be more than just a few years.
No, I
And
think
that's
it was,
gone then.
yeah, we didn't want to extend that out. The new borrowing I don't think it was even any longer than the original
I
term.
think 2015 is the final
Yeah,
maturity
paid
date
off.
for the new
Yeah.
bonds that you issued.
Anything else? Okay. Chad, thank you very much. I know that it's hard, you do a lot of work and so on, and it's hard to summarize everything here, but a measure of the work is in all these documents that are available for public perusal if anybody would like to come and look at them or look online. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Do we want to receive this, make a motion to receive the financial report? And if so, would somebody please make a motion to do so?
I make a motion, we accept the comprehensive financial and reports as audited into the record, as
Okay.
presented.
Yes.
Second that motion?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we receive and approve these reports. Is there any discussion? Okay, I think I can do this by voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion is approved unanimously. We'll now move on, and as the short preview showed here, our next discussion is a discussion by our city manager and our Public Works Department on the preliminary plans for our street and alley repair for this coming fiscal year. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Mayor and council, thank you very much. Jim Karch, I think it was just last week, made a presentation to our infrastructure committee. And while we're not going to repeat that presentation, we've condensed it. And the purpose tonight is to bring to the council the recommended extensive list of streets and alleys, others to be improved, paved over during this upcoming summer. Now, this is the proposed project for what will be in the fiscal year 2014. You might recall last year, similar to this time, we brought you a map and a list of recommended streets that our engineering staff was proposing for resurfacing. We're doing that again. Tonight is the presentation. We'll come back in 2 weeks after you've had a chance to review it or even drive the streets if you'd like, as we have done as staff to give comments. But before turning it over to Jim, I do want to say one other thing that's very important. That is, you might recall in the current fiscal year, just for street resurfacing, we budgeted $3.5 million. In the fiscal year 2014 budget, which I'll present in 2 weeks, I'm recommending that be increased by $500,000 and that go to $4 million. Now, $4 million, you've also got to keep in mind, that is for street resurfacing. On top of that, we also have approximately $2 million in additional expenditures, which you will see related to new construction. That's funded by the motor fuel tax. So if everything continues to go as planned, we'll see next year, a $500,000 increase. And you might recall when I came here 4 years ago, we had to borrow money from the water fund to even do any street resurfacing. So I think this demonstrates the council's commitment and staff's commitment to focusing on your priority, and that is streets and what we can do to continue to increase funding to the infrastructure, which while we always are looking at the street surface, tonight you're going to hear a little bit more from Mr. Karch about how we're also trying to make sure that the underground unseen improvements and other improvements are being taken into account going forward to have a much more robust and comprehensive outlook every time we consider any kind of street resurfacing. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim Karch, our Public Works Director, for this brief presentation.
Thank you, City Manager. Mayor and City Council, it's important tonight for this presentation to give a little bit of context of where we've been, where we're going, and why we're here today, what we're bringing to you to look for your approval at the next council meeting. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, whenever I started working for the City of Bloomington, it was just the way we did business to spend $500,000 on street resurfacing year after year. It had been that way and stayed that way up until about 2005 when we increased it, doubled it to $1 million. And so I think it's good to keep in context of where we were today in 2013. Now we have a street paving, street rating system that actually all the citizens can go out on the internet. They can see that. We have been very aggressive in our preventative maintenance. I think that is something that we really want to talk more about. You've heard us talking about. We're going to continue to talk about. Our sewer master plan is something that we're really putting a large emphasis on, and that will help us with ratings. What we briefly want to touch on tonight is what else we're doing, how we're continuing to try to make strides to not just go in and do the overlay without looking at some of the other infrastructure components. The term you'll start hearing us use more and more is this complete infrastructure rehabilitation, block by block. And what we're trying to take a look at more is underground utilities, curb and gutter, sidewalk, the ramps, a lot of the things that you don't see, so that when we come into a block just to resurface it, it isn't just an overlay. We have to make sure we take into account what is there, what is it going to look like when we're done, even street signs, even those type of issues. The sewer master plan we've been talking about that is going to be coming up, that rating system will really help drive us to make some decisions about what is underneath that pavement. Up on the screen right now, you'll see that this is a map we've talked about before, and it's very difficult to read, but colors are easy to see. And what I'd like to just point out to you are the red. The red is really very prevalent. You can see in the core part of town. You know, that's where the deeper, darker reds are sewers that are built before 1900, and the lighter reds are before 1940. Well, you can see that that's a large part of the city. So when we come into a block and we resurface it, we have to take into account what's underneath that pavement. And so those are the types of things that in the past it hasn't always been done, and we're continuing to make progress in that direction as this sewer rating system, as we continue trying to get that in place, and this master plan is a component of that. That will really help us to make intelligent decisions on where we resurface. The sewers a lot of times will drive that. Water mains as well will drive where we resurface. Well, we also have curb and gutter we've talked a lot about. When we go into areas, we look now at really also look at curb and gutter for certain spot repairs. Look at, for example, on the screen now you can see unused old laydowns. We want to come in and we want to fix those. You know, sidewalks have a functionality to them. They carry stormwater. They allow for a barrier between the parkway and the street. So they do serve a very good purpose, a functional purpose, and so we're also trying to do more spot repair. So we also talk about where curb and gutter is completely lost. We all know those areas that past practice of overlay after overlay where there is no more curb and gutter, that has to be taken into account too. What do you do with that? And it's one of those balances that we're trying to think about moving forward, that, you know, coming through and doing a complete curb and gutter replacement, as you can see up on the screen, looks very nice. It costs about double the amount of money to come into a block and put in curb and gutter where it was completely lost previously. So those are some considerations moving forward. Sidewalk. ADA The ADA now requires us, not just with ramps, but with our sidewalks. We're trying to come through and take a look at our sidewalks. So whenever you see us make some decisions, when you see staff try to move forward with our resurfacing program, we also come in and we look at what are the sidewalk conditions. We need to be doing something with the sidewalks. You can see the sloping issues that are out there up on the screen. You can see a picture of a very poor sidewalk. This is an example of the type of before and after picture up on the screen. You can see that what we're really striving for when we want to come through an area, we want to make this whole block a better feel, better look to it. That's one of the goals that we've been trying to have. The non-compliant ramps that you see all around town, they can no longer be there when we go through. We have to make sure we improve and upgrade those ramps. You can see some positive examples of ramps up on the screen right now. We even look at water main. We coordinate with other departments, and one of them is the water department. We look at hydrants. We talk about what, the age of the water main, what type of issues they're having with water main, and do we need to be looking to hold off the street to be resurfaced because of that? It may be the water main needs to be redone. So that is, we just want to give you some context as we come through and we talk about what we're trying to make changes on, as we introduce this program to you and look to ask you to make some decisions, we'd like to just keep in context of what we're trying to do as a staff. So I'm going to go back to this original map here with the preliminary resurfacing list for this year and point out just a couple things to you before I allow you, just if you have any questions. You'll notice this map before you actually has $4.5 million worth of streets up on there. I want to make sure I point that out to you, and the reason for that is that it's important for you to see, the type of extra work that goes and what else could be done. Also for an additional $500,000, but then also what else? There's a lot of need. There's a lot of outstanding need out there. Staff right now, we're not waiting. We're trying to go through and even now try to assess some of those streets so we can meet the schedule that you see on your council memo, because that's an aggressive schedule. We think it's a great improvement now that we try to get those the work bid so that by May 1st, contractors can start. We've really heard positive comments from the contractors. We think the pricing we've received has been excellent because of this aggressive program. And then we also then can expect the contractors to complete the work given to them before the end of the construction season, which is a great advantage to our citizens as well. So with that being said, I'd like to open this up to any questions that you might have, or City Manager, if you have anything to add.
I'd also just compliment Jim and his staff, because this permanent pothole patching or more professional, large areas of permanent patching and roll down, not only have we, with your approval, provided them with some of the equipment to do that and to really take some of these bad localized areas and make them look much more clean, rideable, smooth, things of that will continue. And I'm also pleased that as those engineers, people like Don Gilmore, the street superintendent and others, they're trying to coordinate to make sure, even though some collector arterial roads maybe are not designed, they are trying to make sure that in the permanent pothole patching program, if there is some bad areas, they're going to get out there and get those fixed in those localized areas. So it's a great coordination and collaboration, and also with all the staff, the water director and others. But like Jim says, what we're looking at is next year, by the time you see this list, you're also going to get even more comprehensive information on what's the condition of the sewer underground, the water line underground. What about the storm sewer? What is our plans, for replacing some of those sanitary sewer lines or lining those? And we'll be benefiting tremendously by that master plan, which I think probably in April and May we'll be bringing to you, which will shed more light on those needs and the priority of those needs and how they should be coordinated with the annual street resurfacing budget. So I think it's great progress is being made by our employees, and we appreciate all their effort. And Mayor, I'll turn it back to you and the council for any questions.
Okay, I see we have a few comments or questions. Rob?
Jim, in visiting other communities, Champaign, Urbana, Peoria, Decatur, Springfield, I'm not sure that any of them had a rating system as sophisticated as ours for streets. And I think that's a credit to us, and it's something that we ought to be proud of. How can an individual citizen find out what the street that he or she lives on is rated?
Thank you, Alderman Fazzini. Yeah, and you're right. A lot of credit, as City Manager Hales had said, we have an engineering technician dedicated to that and does a great job of owning that. Citizens can go to the city's website, the general website, cityblm.org, and underneath the construction link, there's a tab right on the main web page they can go to. Underneath that, as soon as they click on that construction tab, right away, right in the very top, you can see where the street rating system, you can click on that and it can open right up to you to where you can then zoom in on your street, see what it's rated. We do update those regularly. We always make it a point to get through everyone every 3 years, but every year they're always updating something. So it is an actively updated map as well.
And the second thing is when we drive over a pothole and think, wow, this should be fixed, how do we let you know that so that you can, and how quickly do you usually respond?
Yes, for most potholes, the regular ones, the ones that, that are just they hurt the rim of your tire type thing. They're not an overall pavement degradation, but a single pothole. We try to address those within 72 hours. We ask that citizens contact us at 434-BUMP. We figured you can remember that. 434-BUMP or a pothole at cityblm.org. So we try to make it simple. Even I can remember that. So it's a good thing for us.
And if for some reason they forget all that, they could simply call one of us, and we'll get it to you. Thank you.
Karen?
Yes, just wondering about, this is general fund money, correct? And it doesn't include any CDBG potential funding for infrastructure upgrades? And can you give me a sense of where that might be and how it might affect some of our older neighborhoods?
Sure. Actually, staff is looking to coordinate with using some of the CDBG funds. We're really looking to partner in the sidewalk area this year because, we're really going to be seeing that there's a great need in sidewalks as well. And as staff continues to move forward, we'll start presenting to you more of that type of information. But we've been trying to finalize our sidewalk rating information and our, sidewalk master plan, some of those type of things, so we can present them to the council. But what we're seeing preliminarily is that there's a lot of need out there in sidewalks as well. So because of that, we're trying to lay that groundwork and be, just start to prepare ourselves to address more of that need.
So we're likely to see some of that in the upcoming CDBG budget as well. And one additional question, my aging eyes can't quite see all of these streets on here, but we had talked in generalities a while ago about bike plan. And so are any of these streets anywhere near where we're thinking about? I don't know where the staff is on that. I know we've only talked at a pretty high level about that.
I'll go ahead and answer that. Unfortunately, with all the other competing demands, we just haven't made much progress, on trying to create let's see, I think what did Normal call theirs? Was it a
Bicycle master plan?
bicycle master plan?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It didn't make it on our action plan, for the current year.
Okay.
So, during this upcoming budget session, that could be one of those things the
I'll
council
remember
could
that.
ask.
Okay, thank you.
Mboka?
Sure. Thank you, Jim. That looks like a great plan. I have a couple of questions. First one, I think that could be either to you or David, probably David. So it seems like every year we're going in $500,000 increments. So do you foresee us making more drastic investments when it comes to the resurfacing plan?
I do, and I hope that, but those it won't be simple choices of the council, because with all the competing demands we have in public safety and the infrastructure and water supply, to make the larger step increases, we may have to look at additional revenue or reducing services. So there's the city is so unique because we just don't do one thing. We do provide dozens and dozens of services, and so that's the challenge. But in 2 weeks you'll get a better idea of what we're looking at for this upcoming year. But Those are, I think, important considerations going forward because even with our current level of spending, I think Jim and the engineers are showing that unfortunately, it isn't sufficient funding to maintain in a cost-efficient and effective manner the investment we're making in the infrastructure going forward. And keep in mind this, you hear some of these street numbers. In a couple of months, you're going to hear some very large numbers on what are the unmet financial needs in the area of sanitary, sewer, and storm water. And those are going to be some very large numbers. And and we're continuing to expand our capital improvement program. The Public Safety Committee has heard about some of the fire station building needs. And we've got some other master plans coming. So we're trying to make sure that the council and public just isn't looking at the next year, but we have really upwards of a 20-year master plan of how do we preserve and maximize the investment we have in many, many assets. And tonight we're just talking about, streets and some utilities. So there's many others to be considered in future years.
And if I could, I'll even add to that in addition to, we're looking to recommend spending $4 million, plus there's other money that we're looking to have new street construction, another $2 million. So, you have all of that expenditure, but on top of that, I think it's good to address there is a gap between, where we should be spending and where we're at, even though we've continued to increase it. Let me address, though, how we're looking as a staff to try to bridge that gap. What we're trying to look to do is we've expanded in the last couple of years some preventative maintenance treatment like Reclamite. A new treatment that we're trying to start more of is CRF, which is a thicker, type of treatment, asphaltic treatment that we're trying to use. They are different types of treatments used at different points in a pavement's life. The intention is if you have a gap in where your funding is, how can you do that? You try to spread the life of your pavement. And so what we're trying to do is have cheaper insurance to be able to spread the life of our pavement. That should, in essence, try to minimize that gap. Between that and the council's support of our increasing this pavement pothole patching, permanent pothole patching program, all of those things, what they do is they help stretch the life of our pavement. And we're hoping as a staff to see if we can't, there does become a cap of how much we can afford to spend on resurfacing annually. We're trying to find other ways to bridge that gap. So it's important as a council that we've been trying to make strides in those areas as well.
Very good.
Stephen?
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry, you're still.
yeah, just a quick question, not really a follow-up, but a different question. I know you and I have talked about Fort Jesse. Hate to go too specific, and I see that it's on there, but not the portion that I see most and that I think also needs some help. I know you have a rating system, but does the rating system take into account those areas that are most visible? I think that's one that's pretty visible, rather than looking at just the basic rating system.
Yes. Alderman Malamboy, I think I understand your question. What we do the ratings do not take into account volume or average daily traffic. So the number of vehicles, it is an objective rating system, but how we apply that rating system is not objective. How you apply that rating system, then you have to balance some of the large street and the smaller streets, and that's where we try to make some of that mix. Unfortunately, if I just said this, if you drove your ward tomorrow and found some streets, in each of your wards, you would find many streets that we could easily justify to resurface. We've said before that, the large dollar number of $60 million to get all of the streets in Bloomington up to a rating of 6 out of 10 or good. That's a very large dollar figure. So I know that in each of your wards, you could find some streets that need to be resurfaced. And so it is not that there's not other need out there. As a staff, what we try to do is find that balance between what the need is and trying to be able to find a viable program for the upcoming year.
You pretty much answered all the questions I asked about that. Going from $500,000 to, now about $5 million. And looking at all the streets, it looks like it's scattered out pretty throughout the city. So some of the aldermen, they have bad streets or streets that they get, some calls on that these are covered on that. But can you give me any insight maybe why we only spent $500,000 in '05 and then started accelerating? I know why we started accelerating. We see we needed more money on the streets. But the question is, we're up at 4.5 million to 5 million, depending on, how you cut the numbers. You said we need 60 million to really bring them up to all the streets up to a top grade. How much would we have to increase in order to bring them up quicker? I mean, would we have to make $2 million more next year?
Obviously, every additional amount that you spend reduces that, the overall the need out there. And that's really, it just depends on whatever is spent. Obviously, any money that can be put toward resurfacing can be used. But the reality is that, there are other competing needs, as the city manager mentioned.
If I can also...
And also the freeze-thaw, process, like it froze pretty hard here last week and then it thawed out today. That does open up a lot more potholes that I've seen just today, in driving. Thank you.
David? If I could just, I think it'd be foolish too to think that we go out and spend 60 million, because what we're trying to do is, hopefully these resurfacing projects should give that street about 20 years life, 15, 20 years. If the sewer line underneath is 100, 110, 120 years old, and if it has the potential of springing a leak, and I think you've seen some, sometimes when we come in here with emergency repairs, we could easily spend $35,000, $50,000, $60,000.
Right.
So we're trying to make sure we just don't look at the surface,
Right.
It'd be superficial, but we also look at what are those underground utility needs that may need to be addressed financially and repaired in the next 20 years. And that's, again, goes back to this comprehensive. We've got to do that, or we're not going to be spending our investment wisely if we don't look at those underground needs and coordinate that as well.
Right. Very similar to what we did on Country Club, where they put in sewer water pipes because of the separation of sewers. So that's why the street was totally tore up in order to put in both pipes. Thank you.
And I just want to remind the council that going back to almost 8 years ago and so on, we made a deliberate decision to try to increase that year after year. And other than 1 year during the recession, we've been able to do that. Had we been spending $500,000 a year for the last 8 years, that would be $4 million. Now we're spending that much in just 1 year, or that much or more. And that's the only way we're going to get it done, is just keep plugging away at it. Jim?
Just a quick question. I think, Mboka, were you talking about Fort Jesse between Airport and Towanda? Okay. All right. My question probably applies to this, Jim. Do we ever do a joint effort with the town of Normal? So if we had that Fort Jesse with Bloomington on one side, Normal on the other side, where is that on our planning radar?
Well, with Fort Jesse, that area, because Bloomington actually annexed that ground first, as we came up to that ground, it came up to that right-of-way. We got to the other side of that right-of-way, so that is Bloomington right-of-way in that area. That's not a shared responsibility. That is Bloomington's right-of-way in that area.
So that's Fort Jesse all the way from Hershey all the way out?
To Airport, yes. And there is a break in some of that. As you get further to the east, it hasn't been annexed yet out by, but actually in that area we still are looking to resurface and have to deal with some of that. There are areas with Fort Jesse up by Hershey Road that there is shared responsibility in addition to Airport Road, but that's at the intersections. And that's where the different legs, so whenever it does come to putting in traffic signals, for example, there is an intergovernmental agreement between Bloomington and Normal to where because of how many legs, who has the legs of the intersection, that is by percentage, that the signal, whenever it is signalized, that cost will be shared. But the actual road itself, that is Bloomington's responsibility.
Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah. Jim, in visiting six other communities nearby, one of the reasons to do that is to learn what they're doing and see if we can't copy some good ideas, and also to share what we're doing, like having our streets rated, with them so that they could copy ideas from us. In visiting those 6 cities, Alderman Fruin, Alderman Milamwe, and the mayor have come along on some of those trips. And one of the things we found out is that some of the cities actually have a local motor fuel tax, and the ones that do have found that their gas price is not actually increasing, which is sort of a strange concept. But I can verify it because I travel back and forth to Champaign to our main office when I was working several times every month. And I would buy gasoline in Champaign-Urbana just as often as I would in Bloomington Normal. And they had a 4-cent local motor fuel tax. The city of Champaign is about our size, and that 4-cent local motor fuel tax got them $1.5 million that had to be dedicated for streets, street maintenance. So if the price doesn't go up and the users are actually paying for it, a concept that we like to use, and nearby communities are doing it, and then talking with State Senator Brady and State Representative Brady, they have indicated that there seems to be an increasing trend of communities doing this. That's another option of having more money to spend on street maintenance without probably costing our citizens much or anything in the way of additional user fees, and having other people who use and purchase gasoline in our community help pay for it. So I just throw that out. I'm not proposing it this evening. I'm just telling you that that's another way to perhaps increase how much we're spending.
Okay, are there any other comments? Again, this is just to give you an idea, and then we'll come back with this. But take an opportunity to drive around your areas, put your ear to the ground, listen to the citizens, and this is still not set in concrete. But if we don't hear anything, then it will be.
Yeah.
Right.
Mayor, I just ask everyone to just glance at that schedule, because on February 11th, again, we'll just ask the council to at least confirm that they're okay with that list. There's still a lot of work being done, looking underground at some of these utilities and pipes, but you do have a very aggressive schedule for us to begin advertising for bids in March, opening bids April 8th, and then approving the contract for this $4 million worth of work on the April 22nd City Council meeting. So we would welcome your feedback, and please get a hold of Jim Karch, myself, if you have any questions or comments on this preliminary list of streets to be resurfaced and other improvements to be made this summer.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move to item number 8C, and this is the Worth's Beverage Property Tax Abatement for Economic Development Purposes. This was discussed several council meetings ago when we asked other governmental units to join us in doing this. Now it's our turn to do the final vote on this. David, you want to just briefly explain it?
Mayor, let me do remind you and the council and the public, the council has already acted on a tax abatement agreement for the city of Bloomington. What we have before you tonight is a property tax abatement agreement which impacts the city of Bloomington Library. As you know, while the library board recommends, council approves their tax levy, and if you go on page 2 of the staff backup report prepared by Justine in cooperation with others of the EDC, you can see that the real tax, currently being received by the city of Bloomington Library is only about $13 in real tax in 2011. It shows the total abatement over this 5 years would ultimately, with the improvement and the investment being made, would amount to about $6,000, which after the end of the tax abatement period would be something coming back to the library. Similar to once before, we were recommending that this proposed property tax abatement agreement be approved by the City Council. It has come with a recommendation of the Board of Trustees of the Bloomington Public Library. And we do have with us again tonight Ken Springer from the EDC. He can answer any additional questions you might have, but again, basically this is very similar to the other action you took on a property tax abatement for the City of Bloomington, I believe, in December. I think it was last month.
Okay. Have any questions or doubts or whatever popped up in the last month for anybody?
I make a motion we pass it as approved.
Second that motion.
Rob?
The only real question I had earlier was, does this fit all the aspects of the recently approved retail incentive policy that we adopted not too many meetings ago? And I've been assured that it meets all the aspects of that policy, which is very good because that policy will help us attract businesses like this, and we can operate within a framework and know what we're doing. So I'm ready to vote.
Okay, seeing no more questions, we will take it. Okay. Stephen?
In the description on the proposal tonight, it says at least 120 jobs, be created. My only concern is that maybe 120 jobs wouldn't be brought here, and if that was the case, I want to know if there's anything in here that would reduce the amount of tax benefit. That's the only concern I have.
Let
Just
me
to make
ask.
Sure, indeed, there's going to be 120
Let me ask
jobs brought.
Mr. Springer to come forward, and if you can kind of mention what we have in agreement to address that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address the council. Alderman Purcell, yes, there are the 120 jobs requirement is written directly into the agreement between each taxing body and WIRTS in a section that we call clawbacks, basically the performance benchmarks that WIRTS has to meet those requirements. Otherwise, at the taxing body's discretion, they can give notice to the company and terminate the agreement.
Right. Because my concern is right now it's just bare property, so there's not much property tax, $55 coming to us, but it gets to $25,000 once the building is built. And I understand that's the amount that they're going to put in the buildings and development of the property. So we're basically giving them $25,000 a year if they would just come in and build without the incentive. You see what I'm saying? So I just want to make sure we indeed create those jobs to make sure that we give the citizens what they want. And also, we give the company what they want. Okay?
Yeah, we deliberately structured the agreement so that each taxing body was protected and that there were those benchmarks included.
I just want to have that clarified, that's all. I don't have any other problem. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything else now? Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a vote on this. Excuse me. This is a yes vote would approve the proposed property tax abatement agreement as it's passed through for the City of Bloomington Library. Tracy?
Alderman Purcell.
Yes.
Alderman Fazzini.
Yes.
Alderman Fruin.
Yes.
Alderman Nolamwe.
Yes.
Alderman Stearns.
Aye.
Alderman McDade.
Yes.
Alderman Schmidt.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes. And that brings us to the end of our agenda, our regular agenda for this evening. I'll ask our city manager, David, do you have anything that you want to share with us?
Yes, I would like to remind the council that in 2 weeks' time, we'll be holding our annual City Council State Legislators Work Session. Staff's kind of trying to pull together not only what are some of the Illinois Municipal League legislative priorities, of course we're a member of the IML, but also what are some of our unique needs, as well as what are some of the significant projects where we may in the future need to reach out and ask for some assistance from our state legislators. So I would encourage you, I will try and get out a draft to that later this week to kind of give you a first look-see at what we have on the agenda, but I would encourage you if there's anything you want to make sure that we have on this work session, please give me a call, shoot me an email in the next few days, and then as soon as we have at least a draft, we'll get that out there for your review. But that'll be taking place in 2 weeks, and we have a good response. I think all the state legislators either will be here in person or have a representative attending, similar to last year.
And is it going to be over in the Osborne Room again?
I believe that's where we're trying to schedule that. To be
Okay,
held
just
over
for the
there.
benefit of the public, the Osborne Room is over in the police department, and that is a public meeting. You're welcome to attend. Anything else? Let's see, just a couple of real quick things. It was brought to my attention that a former assistant city manager, Rick Bailey, passed away within the last week. And Rick was last year, what, in the 90s? 2003, was it that? Okay. I was not mayor when he was here, but I knew Rick from the community. Secondly, I noticed that the map up on the screen was a little bit blurry. Even from here, it was tough to read the street names. Is that a function of the graphics, or was that just the way it was scanned in?
Scott, do you have any comment on that?
I don't need any. Just a real quick.
And I just don't know. I'd have to.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to look at the graphics before we, put them up tonight, but I think it was a factor of, just how small that actually was. I mean, from a projection standpoint, from what we're trying to accomplish up here, we maybe just need to zoom in on some of those spaces a little bit, or try to make those graphics a little bit larger. But, when we get that small, I think it's gonna start to blur.
Okay. Well, just for everybody's benefit, you might want to check and see if there's any other reason in the future. And that's really all I had. Is there anything, Rob, you have your...
Yeah, I do. Mayor, I've had a number of people ask me how we're going to go about filling the Ward 1 seat, and maybe you can give us just a quick overview of how that's going to work, just so the audience is aware.
Sure. I sent out a note, and there was also an article in the paper, but to repeat it here tonight, this is a fairly short appointment. It'd be a little bit over 3 months, if that. Yet we decided that it was probably not right to leave Ward 1 unrepresented for even that period of time. So I'm making an attempt to try to move this very quickly. We made the announcement the day after we got Bernie's resignation. That was last Thursday. We allowed 1 week for people to file a statement of interest with a resume. I'll sit down and talk with people, and I hope that by our very next meeting, I'll be back here with a recommendation. If someone is interested, I would just file by 5 o'clock next, or this Thursday rather, in the city clerk's office, and interested in a resume, but hopefully that will show that the person has been involved in at least some civic activities. That's what I'm looking for on that.
Mayor, if I could, I just think it is helpful, because the unique thing about the redistricting maps that the council approved, that those applicants have to first live within the current boundaries of Ward 1, but they may have an interest in looking at what will be the changes in the boundaries for Ward 1 too. So that's kind of an unusual wrinkle, given this year, this election cycle, and I think once again in 2 years, they are both being impacted going forward from the new ward boundaries.
And I think for the appointment, they only have to live in the current boundary. If someone wants the appointment and then wants to also run, which now I think is only available via write-in, they would have to live in both the current and the future boundaries of Ward 1 to accomplish both those things. It's also necessary that they would have lived in the current ward boundary for 1 year, and that they be a registered voter at the time of appointment. So Judy?
With Ward 3, we had interviews with the council when you appointed the Ward 3 replacement. Is that going to happen, or is it just going to be a vote? Are you just going to have the council vote?
Given, we extended that out, and as you recall, that went for weeks, if not months, to get that done. I think this time, given the fact it's only for less than 3 months, I'll probably just go ahead and submit a name and not do council interviews with the various candidates. We may be able to set up a time to be able to talk to my nomination, though. Okay. Okay? Is there anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Plaque, I hope.